There we go.
Yes.
Good evening. I call the special meeting of the Ames City Council for Tuesday, June 21st to order. Good evening, Council. We have 3 items on the agenda. First is resolution approving change order number 1 to Resco of Elkhart, Iowa, an amount of $18,247.64, inclusive of sales tax for purchase of transformers. I see Director Com is here. Is there any questions for staff? All right. Seeing none and no one else in the audience, I would entertain a motion approving the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye.
Okay, and item number 2, hearing on proposed amendment to zoning ordinance section 19.809 regarding campus town service center requirements. I entertain a motion to declare the public hearing to be open and entertain a motion to continue the hearing to June 28th, 2022.
So moved. Second.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, moving on to item number 3, workshop regarding inclusion and diversity and establishing asset funding priorities. I believe Deb's going to walk us through that.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I included a memo that went out to all of you on Friday, just kind of grounding where this conversation had started and why we're here tonight. So if you recall, in November of 2020, during the review of the Ames policing report, one of the recommendations in that report was to consider reallocating asset funding to other kinds of services. And the conversation that came out of that was to talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, or social justice when we next met about asset priorities instead of looking at reallocating funds at that point in time. That was briefly revisited a year ago, and then council a year ago said, let's have a workshop that's dedicated to this topic. So it can be discussed thoroughly in time for the fiscal year 24 asset priorities. So typically I bring the asset priorities to you in July after I've had a chance to review them with the city volunteers. And so we're having this discussion tonight. And so anything you want to have included as those priorities are drafted, then I'll bring those back in July and final consideration can be made on them at that point in time. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to you to discuss further.
Well, before we get into that discussion, can you maybe highlight what is being done right now? I mean, I know that your volunteers,
Sure.
I know we have 2 council members that served on asset and actually did, visits to agencies. What is being done right now regarding these particular topics and things on the agenda tonight?
Yep. Yeah. So the types of reporting that we ask the agencies to do through their budget submittal is we want to know the number of people that they are serving that have mental or physical disabilities, the number of people that they're serving that fall within certain levels of the federal poverty guidelines. And then we're actually on year 2 of asking agencies to report on the number of people they're serving in race and ethnicity groups. And I do want to be cautious about the data in the race and ethnicity groups because the majority of that reporting has occurred during the pandemic. And we all know that services were altered or not provided at all in some instances. And so that information probably isn't the best baseline to be using at this point in time. But we're certainly going to have the agencies continue collecting that going forward so we can have a more solid and useful trend line.
Okay, thank you.
Deb, when you mentioned the volunteers going over this and bringing forward the things to us about the priorities that they're noticing, the sorts of services that are needed, the rebalancing of the allocations. One of my concerns has been that since I've been on council, it sort of felt like we're just sort of stepping into a process that runs on its own, that we're supposed to be the policymaking body, but we take those recommendations and, maybe we say, well, we'll revise these a little bit to make them easier to use. But I haven't really felt like the city council has made an effort to examine our role in this process and the way in which our priorities reflect our values and goals, or the way in which we are asking the right sorts of questions. In fact, I don't feel like we're asking many questions at all, and that we're leaving that to the asset volunteers or to the agencies themselves, sort of kicking the can down the road to somebody else to ask the questions. And then we just sit up here and say, okay, that sounds good. We'll allocate this funding. I don't know if that's even an accurate depiction of what is happening with the process. So what do you see as council's role in exploring those priorities with the volunteers or with the wider community?
So a few things on that. So council's role, so asset is intended to be a funder-driven process. And by that, we mean the funders have the authority to set policy. So we do the policies and procedures manual. We review that every year. Any changes made to that go to the funders for final approval. So that's one area of the policy setting. The funder priorities is another area, and each funder handles that a little bit differently in terms of involving volunteers or using other kinds of sources that help outline their mission or the areas of service that they want to focus on. Recently, one of those sources of information was the 2020 Community Needs Assessment that came out, and we do refer to that assessment in asset. Any agency that's looking at a new or expanded service, we've always asked them to refer to the most recent assessment to help justify their request for that new or expanded service. So that's another piece of information. And then I think, during the conversations that we have when you are setting the allocation in the information that comes forward from the budget requests, and you ask questions, and there may be things that come out of that discussion that I use when I go into the agency hearings the following month. And so I'm also then that conduit from council to the asset admin team, as well as all of the volunteers. So those are just some of the various ways that I see council's roles. And then the joint funders meetings. So we've got joint funders meetings in September and January, and those are, the perfect venues for funders to bring up any issues or, items of concern that they want to discuss with the admin team, the volunteers, or the other funders.
So when we're getting let's say the 2020 Community Needs Assessment, is that our primary way of getting information from the larger community about what our priorities need to be? Or do we have another means? When we have something like the various CDBG programs that Vanessa administers, we have to hold community meetings. Do we do any of that at all for this, or do we just get information through those surveys and from our actual agencies?
Yeah, it's primarily through the agencies, and the agencies are, they're required to provide outcomes. They do their individual surveys with their constituents or people that they serve on quality of services and access to services and satisfaction to services, and report then again, through the budgeting process, the budget submittal, the number of people that they're serving, duplicated, unduplicated numbers. So it is a lot of, we're asking the agencies to report on these things, and then they provide the information back to us.
And once we have the scorecard in place for a number of years, we're anticipating that our information from those agencies is going to be more robust.
Yep. So the whole intent with Clear Impact Scorecard, and just for clarification, that particular database or reporting mechanism rests with United Way of Story County, and it is funded by the city and the county and United Way for the purposes of collecting outcomes and reporting that information out. We're at a point we can give you access to the scorecard, so you can go in and you can look at those agency outcomes and the trend lines. And I'm going to, it's really United Way and Annika Mundell. She is the Community Impact Director. She's the one that's kind of the keeper of the information with Clear Impact Scorecard, and works very closely with the agencies on identifying their outcomes and ensuring that they're reporting on those in the way that's intended. But that is information, and that's a program that we can provide access to council members, so you can start reviewing that data and discussing it as we move forward with priorities and allocations.
We're all actually required to meet with Annika annually to go over not just the agency outcomes, but also United Ways and assets, priorities, and kind of retool things if needed or adjust to better address. Because I know like this year, United Way adjusted some of what it's doing. And so we were required to go in and adjust based on that. So.
And that's all the agencies, Amber?
Yep. It's part of the contract.
So my concern, and I think the reason that I wanted to have this meeting, is that I don't see the council asking questions about the impact of what we're doing. And as we move toward hiring a DEI coordinator, I'm hoping that as we get the position filled and we start to look at doing some sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion community strategic plan, that all of our services are going to start looking at the way we budget, the way we interact, all of the things that make up city government as part of that plan, and that we're going to be considering diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, or social justice, in everything that we do and the way the community operates. Right now, I don't think we're asking questions as a council that are focused on those issues. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way Asset is working right now. I think it functions okay, but I feel like council has become distanced, and maybe we've always been distanced from the process, and that we are not the ones who are actually asking the questions about how our money is impacting the community. And that may become more possible as the scorecard data is filled in over the coming years, and as we see more reporting on race as a feature of our social services offerings. But right now, I don't feel like council is asking the community, what do you need in terms of priorities from us? I don't think that we have those meetings where we have citizen input or offer the opportunity for citizen input on what our priorities are, other than having one council meeting where we talk about it. And so I just wanted to foreground this issue for one meeting, this one, as an opportunity for us to determine whether we want to be asking those questions, whether we want to say, well, that's something the DEI coordinator is going to work out and we'll just push it off for now. Or whether we say, we've got enough of that lower down the line in the process. So the agencies are asking questions, the volunteers are asking questions. That's supposed to relieve council of having to do that same thing with this particular process. So that's where I am on this. And I did send you some examples of the kinds of questions that could be asked by policy setting bodies. I'm not saying we have to ask those questions. It's just that communities that are looking at things through a social justice lens are turning to those kinds of questions about who's being impacted or not impacted, whether they're being positively impacted or negatively impacted, and where are we getting our information? Are we getting the information from the communities? Community engagement is notoriously difficult, especially with those groups that have been historically marginalized or historically underrepresented. And yet those might be the groups that are most likely to interact with this asset process at some point in seeking services. Are we asking them what we should be spending our money on? Those are the things that I've been thinking about, and I would like council to talk about it. Because I think we have a responsibility to make some sort of stand on this. Either everything's working great, we don't need to do anything, or something else. And we have several options presented to us in the council action plan.
So I have a question because I haven't seen the whole process before, but so with that report that comes to council, what kind of data are we getting from the agencies? Like I've seen the big manual of everyone that gets funded, but what kind of data are we getting currently from them?
Through the budget submittal,
Yes.
the binder, the big budget
Yes.
book that I've
what are
shown you.
we, you mentioned collecting according to the priorities, the mental and physical health, poverty guidelines, and race and ethnicity. Are those the only, like, are we getting age and gender and all of those kinds
Yep.
of
So
things
yeah, we
too?
are getting age. We used to collect gender information, and that was withdrawn. Gosh, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I know that aligned with what the city was doing in terms of we were no longer collecting gender on employment applications or applications for programs and services.
Okay.
So that isn't something that we are collecting, but age, race, ethnicity, location of residence, and that's primarily so we know whether or not they're an Ames resident, Story County resident, Iowa State student or staff,
Right.
income level, and then the mental health and physical disabilities.
Okay.
That's within their budget. We are going to move some of that information over into scorecards so we can again create a trend line for that.
Mhm.
Other information that's collected then comes primarily through scorecard, and that would be the outcome information. So what kind of an impact is Micah's Food Pantry having in the community? And they have measurements for that they report on in scorecard. How is HERDA meeting the transportation needs of Ames residents? How many rides are they given? That information then is reported in scorecard that you'll have access to.
And that's fairly recent, right? I mean, it's been on my time on council that we started doing the scorecard, even fairly recently. Do you know how many years?
I think we've done 3 years
3.
of data.
And you got
Yes.
So-
yeah, the pandemic thrown in there to scramble the eggs
Right.
for
Sure.
two of them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is makes it really hard to get any sort of like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we're like, when I look at our scorecard for mainstream, like we're just starting to see trends. And because it is still new, and like I said a little bit ago, like we're still meeting with Annika and going back and sort of making sure that the things that each agency is tracking is useful, first of all, and that it's in line with the priorities. So I know, like for mainstream, when we had our meeting this year and we went through everything that we were tracking, some of the things that agencies like Mainstream or Friendship Arc or LSI and YSS are tracking are also things that we track for the state of Iowa. So we're submitting the same outcomes to the county and city and United Way that we would to the state. But then there's individual metrics that are also added that are just based on the county and, like I said, what the priorities are. So Deb talked about, how many people are served at the food pantry. If there's surveys done, how many people are reporting that they're more financially secure than they were the year before, those types of things. Like for us, we're tracking people who are able to find and keep affordable and safe housing, things like community integration for people with disabilities. So it really varies based on each agency and the service that they're providing.
So
go ahead, Anita.
Another question. So is there the opportunity to sort of crosswalk council goals in terms of like diversity and those kinds of things with the asset? What I'm thinking is that, I understand we're not at the point right now where we can really get a good baseline, but that once that's established, then if there are certain council goals around maybe a more accessible city, and then as we're looking at our council goals to sort of map those over what's happening with an asset, which to me that could be a potential council function, is to map over and say, hey, well, here's where asset is really helping us to meet that. Here's where there's not coverage, which is all good for asset, but it gives us information about where we might want to do additional work in order to make sure that those needs are met in another way. So having that opportunity as a part of council discussion to say, okay, they're doing this well, but we still have a hole here. And so let's see what else we can do to meet that particular need.
So trying to identify the gaps.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. And it's important to keep in mind that asset is about services. You're funding services and in identifying those services through the priorities.
Right.
And so if you're going to put other layers on top of that, it's just important to remember that at the end of the day, the funding is going towards services.
Service.
Yep. The other piece of or other pieces of information that get collected, and this is in more of a qualitative fashion, is each volunteer is what we call a liaison to agencies, and a volunteer may have one or two agencies that they're required to visit in the fall after the budgets have been submitted. And they meet with those agencies. They're also supposed to attend a board meeting of that agency to get an idea of the interactions of the board and how well the agency is being managed. And so some of the information that we collect, and then they write up a report. And the information that we collect on that report is, describing the target population that the agency is serving, keeping in mind that some agencies serve many populations, but others are really focused on maybe it's domestic violence, or maybe it's probation supervision, or others might be low income with rent and utility assistance and food pantries. So, and some of those then, overlap, of course. And then we want the agency to identify their strengths. Where are they doing well? Are there the clientele that they're serving, is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it meeting the projections that the agency is forecasting over the next few years? Because we do encourage agencies to have strategic plans and to be doing strategic planning for the organization. We also want them to be identifying what their weaknesses or what the barriers are in providing services. Is it, is it funding? Is it the condition of the location that the service is being provided? Do they, need assistance with finding another location or remodeling their current building that they're providing services in? And if they didn't receive asset funding, would that impact their services? And if so, how? Would they have to reduce services, stop providing that service? That's the other thing that we've talked about in council is how much of asset funding is going towards providing these services. And if an agency is looking at asset funding, 50, 60, 70% of their agency budget, we really want them to be looking at some diversifying their funding and not solely rely on asset to help meet the needs of their budget. But just another piece of information that we're collecting within their budget submittal. We also ask, the role of the board of directors. Does it seem to be, a pretty cohesive board? Are there policies in place that identify how board members are selected, and are there terms, and just how all of that seems to be working? Is there training within the agency? Are staff encouraged to go to training and get the tools that they need to be able to provide the services for the agency? So we want to know that management piece as well. And is the organization, is the structure supported enough to be able to provide the services on an ongoing basis, or do they have to look financially and structurally for some other kind of model to help provide their services? So those are the things that we collect, and then we also collect agency comments back on the process or clear impact scorecard or things that they might need additional assistance with.
Question's been asked how our priorities arrived at, and there's community surveys. There's a countywide survey. Can you kind of go over just in brief? I mean, this is not just pulled out of, someone's just not guessing essentially. In fact, I think this council rearranged the priority 1 and 2, I believe, recently because of the fact that it was clearly identified through, I think, council members' direct contact with constituents or friends or family, and also observations through workplaces and others, that mental health and substance abuse, which really knows no bounds in terms of who it may or may not attack or affect. But there's already a process that we go through, or council goes through. Can you kind of just review that, briefly? Because I think some of the stuff that's being talked about is actually being evaluated as a part of that, or is getting feedback to the council through these surveys. Is that correct or not? Or
Yep. So what we used primarily for the last review of priorities was the community needs assessment. That was started in late 2019 and then wrapped up almost a year later during the pandemic. And we actually did an extension to that because we were concerned about additional needs that were bubbling to the top as a result of the pandemic. And mental health certainly was one of those. So that information was the primary basis for this last go around of reviewing priorities. We can look to see too if there's anything that comes back on the residents survey that's done annually. If there's anything that's sparked through comments or responses to that annual survey. The thing about that is we're always going to be looking at probably a year behind, because the data or the results from that survey come in the fall, and the priorities are already set by that time. But we can certainly look at the results of that survey as well to help guide. And I think that, that what what you're hearing in the community and the people that you're talking to, the agencies that you're talking to as well, what they're identifying within their own organizations. We do during the agency hearings in January ask agencies after they've presented, what they're seeing as their priorities, and we leave that, or we try to stick to that being their services, but then also glean through that, what other kinds of things they're experiencing as a result of providing services and working with the clientele that they do. And a common theme that we're hearing now is workforce, of course, and not being able to provide services to the fullest extent because of gaps in their workforce. And wages are a part of that, although they're trying to find ways to bolster wages so that there's retention and recruitment efforts for new staff.
One of the things that United Way does too is they hold a number of listening sessions with representatives from agencies, as well as other representatives that they invite from the community to come in, and they host several of them when they're discussing priorities and bring that back to the admin team. And so
Well, it seems there's an alignment too between the university, the county, United Way, and the city too. To the point of you're almost seeing the same priorities. So it all basically taking the temperature of the community, understanding what the issues are in order to arrive at something. And I think that's been the beauty of what's been going on, is that as we met as joint funders, as council has been there and been engaged in conversation, I think it's been very productive to understand and get a handle on, what it is and what boundaries it's crossing, over. So last question from a standpoint of how do people access all these different services? And for example, there's 20, 30 some funders that are taken care of, or there's like 40 some programs. I mean, so we have 100 some nationalities. People are become aware of it. How do they become aware of what's available to them as needs? Because to me, that seems to be an important aspect, that if people, is it a matter of not being adequately publicized, or is there adequately publicized if people are just don't have needs for specific services? Just curious about that.
Yeah, the marketing and promotion of services happens, I think, at a lot of different levels. Like many things, you may not know that something's out there until you need it. And then you start talking to people. Right. So word of mouth is definitely one way that people learn about those services. I wish, so 211, which is supposed to be the information and referral number or hotline, has information. And I know United Way has led the charge on trying to make sure that information is kept up to date as things change. We used to have a community resource guide, and one of the agencies took the lead on keeping that up to date. And typically what happens with something like that is when the person leaves, then the work doesn't get done. So it's not really an effective tool at this point in time. But we rely on entities such as the Department of Human Services, the agencies themselves that know the other resources in the community. We really are a service-rich community, and people are pretty well networked. The agencies are pretty well networked. And so if someone is at Mainstream and, I'm going to need some food, Mainstream knows, okay, here are some resources for
the
that.
schools are also really good at referring people to agencies.
Yep, with the family resource staff that are within the schools, and then the caseworkers that are working in the various agencies, and we get calls, and people are asking for specific services, so we can help channel them in the right direction. Vanessa gets those calls and helps refer, and I believe customer service when people are coming in and needing help with a utility bill or maybe have other needs. There's a list with the customer service representatives as well here in City Hall. So a variety of those websites, and I know that not everybody has access to the internet, but it is a tool that we haven't always had, but agencies do a good job at keeping websites up to date, and you can apply for services online, or there's contact information to get a hold of them. The library is a great resource. They have a resource guide that they try to keep updated to make available to people coming into the library to that are asking about services. So those are many ways that we try to get the
Yeah.
word out.
I know that some of the agencies that are funded do cross-refer too, if there's, needs as well too. And I think there's our faith communities that are aware of what the needs are as well too. So, I mean, I think the point is a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of cross, promotion. So make sure that people are aware of, what the what services are being funded by the 4 different, main entities.
Yep.
Anita, did you have another question?
Yeah, just, are there any conversations with the clients or those that benefit from the program? Or do agencies report some of that anecdotal data from their clients as well?
Yes, most of that does come from the agencies themselves. And there are several reasons for that. One, the services that they are providing could be very confidential. And so I'm not going in there and observing, or our volunteers aren't going in there and observing the service delivery. But some agencies might have recipients at their board meeting, or may invite them in for the agency visit that the volunteer is conducting. And so that might offer an opportunity to talk to clients, but the clients would have to agree to be able to participate. But again, I think the majority of the information would come from the survey or the questions that the agency is asking of the recipients, and then collecting that data and reporting it through scorecard.
Sure. You're probably in Des Moines also, but I just know the agency, well, the group I was with previously, we did get United Way funding in Des Moines, and we were required to sort of have a story to tell. And yes, it was all confidential, but
Yeah, we
We-
have
we
to
did
submit a
have to do
story of
that.
impact every year.
Mhm, mhm.
Yes, along with all the other stuff.
Yes, there's a lot of reporting.
Do we ever see that story of impact?
It's in scorecard. So
It's in
So not-
scorecard,
not
but it's
yet.
not in stuff that we've been looking at, right?
No.
But I think that's to Deb's point, is
That's the
that
goal, though.
if we hadn't had COVID,
You-
one, we would have had the Story County resident survey needs assessment quicker. So I remember this council was pretty frustrated, not at the staff, but just frustrated with the situation that we, lost some time. And 2 is the scorecard also, and as you mentioned, Annika has made it, aware in some of our funder meetings that if you want to see it, so maybe we're just not aware of what is available information wise. It can be accessed, through United Way. And I think that the scorecard is a pretty powerful tool to really help drill down into the information that we're trying to, become aware of.
Right.
It seems that's kind of, I think that's why this council voted to help fund, the scorecard, because they saw that would be a real good tool in your effort also to become effective in using the funds and make sure we're getting across, where the needs really exist in the community.
Right. And I think once you've had that chance to look at the information in scorecard, you'll have questions, and there'll be different types of questions, and probably maybe even similar questions that we've had as staff has looked at the information and needing it clarified and cleaned up. I mean, and that's really what United Way did a lot of this last year to year and a half, is really worked with agencies and cleaning up. Some just really had so many data points that they wanted to collect information on that it was just so labor intensive. And it wasn't information that I don't think was really going to make the case of what they were doing in the community. It was just more outputs they were collecting versus impact of the service to the community.
all of the scorecard data is on the United Way website. So you can go in and look at any agency's scorecard data. Anyone can.
Yeah, and I think to be able to even dig a little bit deeper, we can get credentials.
Yeah.
Yep. So that you.
But
can
you,
look
I
at
mean,
it.
anyone can go in and look at their metric, what they're currently measuring for outcomes, what their trend lines show, what their current scorecard shows.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
easy.
And are we anticipating that that data is going to be shifting, that we're going to get additional categories? Or are those categories fixed at this point? I had the impression that this was still developing because we weren't really sure what we were getting and how useful it was,
Mhm.
that there may be other things added and some removed.
Right. And so what ACID has allowed the agencies to do is identify what data points they want to collect information on. And so that's kind of how we kicked off the use of scorecards, so we could get agencies used to reporting the data in scorecard. And then that has evolved over time, because now it was like, okay, you're just reporting now on numbers or outputs versus what is the true impact of the service that's being provided. So that's been evolving, and that's where the cleanup has really come in handy, because we're removing what's really more of an output and making sure that it's a data point that is meaningful to the services that are being provided to the citizens.
I'm wondering, with Anita's question about the kind of cross-referencing between the values and goals and the priorities, whether some of that comes because we're looking at the service units, and the question maybe isn't how many service units should we provide, it's what is the impact that we're trying to achieve.
Correct.
And then how many service units does it take to achieve that impact? And I think the values and goals are maybe where the impact would emerge.
Yeah, at least the opportunity to see if there are, intersections of those, because I understand these are service agencies, and there has been a process to identify the services that are needed in the community. But we as a city council, in addition to meeting needs, have other types of goals, and the opportunity to see where those can intersect is, I think, a conversation to have. And particularly as we think about diversity and equity and inclusion, then thinking about what are the populations and how are we doing, and how do we get them, those that we want to reach, more involved as we're able to. So
Is that assuming that they're not already accessing the services that already exist? Because it's kind of
No.
the way, because I think that some of these are income based, and so it would just seem that I'm curious, has council heard of situations where people have been discriminated against, or not able to access services, or not aware of the services? So then I'm trying to tease out, is it just an issue of a lack of, so that's why asking, how do people find out about it? Is it more promotion, because all these agencies are bound, they can't discriminate?
sure.
And so I'm just trying to understand where this is going. Or is it something that you have to have a certain number of individuals with certain population groups coming? And I just trying to get to understand where the goal and objective is that council wants to go, to try and help lead in terms of where we're going, in terms of setting questions or priorities or restructuring it. So I'm just trying to understand better, where the issues and concerns are, so we can, be productive.
Right. And I'll say that I'm not sure. I did pull it up, and I'm looking at NAMI right now and their scorecard. But I think an opportunity to look at the data
Mhm.
is important, to then identifying whether or not there are any gaps. And I guess I go back to that earlier comment. And then seeing, why does that gap exist? Is it because of communication? Is there a language barrier? Is there an issue of transportation? But it gives us a chance as a council perhaps to have a deeper conversation about, we're investing in these resources that we want to see benefit our community. Are there other things that we could do as a council that would improve those outcomes? And that's maybe not so much an asset question, but I'm just throwing that out there as part of what we can get from this asset process.
Which goes back to your comment, which I think is appropriate, and that is, how do you get that data? I mean, that's to me, I'm thinking through the numbers and all that. I mean, that's going to be a very, very complex and difficult process to go through to try and figure out where gaps, I'm not going to say there aren't gaps. I'm not saying that at all. It's just more or less statistically reaching out, and someone may have an opinion, well, I don't have all the services I need, but the point is maybe they do have the services, but they, in their opinion, they see what I'm saying, that you almost can't even get it by a survey. So that's where I'm just trying to get it into a concrete piece so staff has some idea where we can go with this essentially.
I think one of the issues, John, is that what you're asking about are the traditional means that we have of getting information from community members. And what Steve and I have spent, a year and a half talking with the community and regional planning students about, is the fact that our current means of engagement are not working for these communities. And so I don't know that there is an argument I don't know that we are succeeding the way we should succeed in getting that information. And honestly, I don't know that people are going to come to me as a middle-aged, white, middle-class woman and say, these are the problems I have accessing services in Ames, because the level of trust with government is pretty low right now across the nation.
And I think, some of the populations that we're talking about, the only interaction they have with the community is through the agencies that are serving them. And so, I mean, that is, from one standpoint, the best on the ground information that we have. I mean, I can just tell you from, a disability standpoint, the agencies that serve that population are going to know far more their barriers to accessing things and, the different challenges that they have in the community better than any random community public input session that's going to be held or any survey that's going to be done or anything like that. I think that once council actually reads through the scorecards of the various agencies, things will make a lot more sense. Some of the agencies are also doing equity pilots with what's being collected in scorecard. So I know we're doing that a little bit. We've already done that. So we volunteered to do it through scorecard because we collect outcomes on social determinants of health for everyone that we serve. ACPC is doing it. They're tracking outcomes of kids who don't speak English as a first language and some other areas. And there are other agencies that are doing this as part of United Way's DEI goals. And so I think if council just looks through all of the scorecards, some of these questions will be answered.
Well, this is the very reason that I wanted to have this meeting, because I don't think any of this is particularly obvious to us. And those of us who aren't working with the agencies or part of an agency don't necessarily understand all those things that are happening. And I think that's great. I really appreciate the direction things are moving, but it just shows that council has been distanced from this in ways that we probably shouldn't be if we're asking, are we doing what we should be doing for the community? Or, as Anita says, to meet our goals or and I think those are questions that we should be asking so that we can have a discussion. And I'm not arguing that we should make a change necessarily, but if we don't ask that question, we're never going to know the answer. And we'll just keep going on the way we've been going. And I wouldn't know that I could access all the scorecard information on the United Way of Story County website, right? So I think it's a positive thing to ask the question, to have the discussion, and to then say, what do we want to do with that information?
How do we make sure we repeat this conversation in a regular way? So like if it's all us, we remember, oh yes, we had that discussion. We want to keep looking at this and keep it under a microscope. But, over time, those things fall off. So is there a way we could, I think it'll happen a little bit with the volunteers looking at information too, but us as the policymaking body, I think you're right that we need to be asking the question to see if there are gaps that we aren't filling. I'm not, I don't know of any either, but we're not asking. So how do we keep, how do we routinely ask this question?
It seems to me that it needs to be something that's built into the process. And, one way to do that would be to say if we're going to have the goal setting sessions twice a year, maybe at one of those where we're perhaps a summer session, we add this in because we won't be doing the setting of new goals and values.
It's just
But
a
it's an
review of
opportunity.
the old ones.
Yeah, and it would be an opportunity to see where we are on the asset priorities and put that as part of that meeting. Or it may be something that the DEI coordinator comes in and has recommendations about later.
In addition.
But I don't see a good reason to wait for that.
So from a tool standpoint, you've got councils, you said you're coming back in July for priorities to be set. Why don't you can you just walk through the process that you're going to go through? Because the point is the volunteers look to council to set priorities, to have idea where we're going. So the point is whatever is done has to be a usable, executable, that's a bad term, but it's you can use it in such a way that it allows them to help work with agencies, ask questions, and make sure that the goals and priorities, and then that they also use the priorities to determine who's going to get funded,
Right.
and that type of sort of thing. So so you can just walk through, what really just our schedule, and then also what would be helpful in your opinion for volunteers based on what's been talked about here for the last 45 minutes.
Yep. So generally what happens is I take the current year current year priorities and I meet with the volunteers and we go through and I'll ask them, okay, does anything stand out to you based on the agency hearings from January? And so that's great for the returning volunteers. It's not super helpful for the volunteers that maybe had just been appointed on April 1st. So they're relying on the other volunteers to kind of help guide that conversation. And so there may be things that we need to incorporate or bring back to council to discuss, to consider changing the priorities, or they might be, nope, these still seem to be sound. Let's take them to council and see if there are changes then that are discussed at the council level. So it's pretty straightforward. But if there are, and I usually do that the first council meeting in July, so that if there are changes, then those can be incorporated and brought back to the second council meeting in July, and then they're ready to go forward to the agencies when we do their training in mid-August. Because we'd like to have the agencies have the finalized list of priorities in hand, and then we do the orientation with volunteers in September, and then usually the priorities that they're sitting right on top and handy for the volunteers when we do the agency hearings in January.
I think I've heard previously, specificity and clarity
Yep.
is helpful. Not that they're not making some subjective or some objective decisions based on what they're seeing and listening, but they want to have a framework inside of which to work, essentially.
Yep, that is correct. And prioritizing the priorities. So that's one of the major changes council took a couple of years ago was putting these in prioritized order. Not only your categories, the 3 categories, but then each of the services that's listed under the category. So that became a very straightforward document for the volunteers to follow.
I had 2 questions. One of them is about that very thing. So they're prioritized, and presumably one is of greater priority than 2, is of greater priority than 3. But does that mean 1A through D are all of greater priority than 2A, for example? Like, you know what I'm, is that,
Yes,
so they are?
yes.
Okay. I was
But-
just curious how, I mean, because really, like, I could see how we could be like, well, yes, we definitely want 1A first, but then 2A, and then 1B, and then 2B, you know, like something like that. Like, there are many ways in which you could organize, though. I was just curious how that was understood. It's good to know that it is all of number 1 first, then all of number 2, and then all of number 3.
But then there's interplay
Yeah,
that
I'm
goes
sure.
on because
Some
for
serve
somebody
2
who
purposes or more or something.
exactly. I mean, it really kind of goes without saying that stable housing is helpful and necessary for somebody to stabilize their mental health.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The other question I had about that was on number 2 there, it says meet basic needs, comma, with an emphasis on low to moderate income. Don't they all have that emphasis on low to moderate income? Like, couldn't you say priorities? These priorities have an emphasis on serving low to moderate income groups, because they kind of all do in a sense, right? I also don't know how many programs exist that aren't for low to moderate income folks,
There's some.
you know, that fall in these categories. Like maybe there's youth development, right? That category for sure. But like food cost offset programs, like it's not really a thing that exists for folks that aren't all low to moderate. But anyway, so I was thinking if we did move the part about the emphasis on low to moderate income to encompass all 3 of the priorities and not just group 2 there, then we could say something like with emphases on social justice and low to moderate income. So it's sort of, to me, in a sense, seems like related in that we're emphasizing we want to focus on low to moderate income, making sure we're meeting those needs, and we want to make sure that we're also hitting any social justice needs. So that was my thought on that, is that we take that qualifier off of number 2 and move that just to be over all 3 of those priorities, that qualifier. And it would say, and to modify it so that it said emphases plural on social justice and low to moderate income, or in the other order, whatever people think about that. But that, I feel like, is kind of more true to what we're doing with any of them anyway, because again, the skill development enhancement, summer enrichment programs that we're doing under number 3, those are also supposed, you know, I think, you know, would get a better score if they're for low to moderate income youth, I assume.
Deb, the agencies that provide services under item number 1, mental health and substance use disorder, are those also income-based, you know, assessment? I'm thinking about crisis intervention services for sake of discussion. I mean, it could be, you could have, to your point, I understand what you're saying, but sometimes mental health
Yeah.
isn't just
Oh,
limited to certain groups. I'm
for
just,
sure.
I'm
No,
just-
I
I'm just
agree with
curious
that.
how that would be,
I
how you would separate that out. Then.
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily. I mean, I think, you know, everyone should have access to those services for
Right.
sure. Low to moderate income folks are disadvantaged in being able to access those in the first place. So a person who is affluent presumably has insurance and things that might cover some of that, right? They have an EAP through work. They have resources maybe that a person who is less advantaged has, right? So I would still say that would still be,
That's why I was asking if it's already in place, if the organizations that provide services already have that, it's already built into it's already in
Yeah,
the recipe, so to speak.
So what's unique about mental health and substance use services is we're really kind of the funder of last resort when it comes to, let's say, treatment. So if someone has an outpatient appointment to see a therapist, if they don't have any insurance, so no Medicaid, no private insurance, then they're a City of Ames resident, they can bill us for that particular unit of service. But if they have private insurance and if they have Medicaid, that's what gets billed for that particular service. NAMI, for example, that's a little bit different too, because they don't accept insurance for the provision of their services because it is more support groups and education to families and individuals. And so they use, and we know that the individuals using those services cross all kinds of socioeconomic systems. So our dollars there are going towards that staff time to provide those education and outreach and support services because there's no other funding source. There's no insurance to pay for those types of services. Does that help?
Yeah, Deb and I were in a meeting. It's a community health advisory group that we're working with a whole bunch of different groups. And this is yesterday, and we're talking actually about mental health. And we just have a mental health epidemic in this community, and we have it actually in the nation. And it's really striking the K-12, and it's terrible. And kids are taking their lives, or they're trying to take their lives. And the recent survey, it's getting bleaker in Iowa. And I think it's happening on Iowa State campus as well, too, but the numbers aren't quite so accessible. So the reason for my question is that there may be kids who need outpatient mental health services that may be, and I'm not arguing to try and have a class-based system. It's just I'm trying to understand for the services that are being funded, if it's already built in that there's a income qualification that if kids from a well-to-do family are struggling with that, no, they're going to get more likely to be referred to so-and-so. The sad part is there's just a plethora of services, period. That's the problem. We don't have a whole lot of services. But anyway, I'm sorry. You know how I feel about mental health and
Well,
how bad. And I know you're not. I know you're not saying not to do that. I was just trying to get down to if the council wants to move to an umbrella of low to moderate income on all these categories, will affect other people that are currently being served, and that's just I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I wouldn't want to. Yeah, I don't know that I'd want to take away funding from someone we're currently funding with this change.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So that's where we maybe need more information, or Deb, you can maybe make that comment right now.
Yeah. So that would maybe be something I would suggest if we feel like it wouldn't negatively affect services that are being provided
Those are the very questions that we should be asking, because I think we have some assumptions about where low to moderate income designations fit into this, and whether, let's just say maybe we all assumed that first one was taking into consideration LMI,
right?
But it really wasn't. Do we want it to? Those are questions that have to be asked,
right?
If you're going to have an answer to them.
Yeah.
So I think that's really an important discussion, because it's absolutely true that mental health issues are epidemic at this point in the community, and Iowa State is no different. They're seriously having issues. The students are.
Yeah.
But it's a question that needs to be asked.
Right.
Yep.
And I also appreciate the fact, Bronwyn, that you brought up, whether 1D is more important than 2A, for example, because that was something that I hadn't thought about, because I guess I assume the asset volunteers they're looking at this and then they're also considering the severity of situations that are indicated in the data.
Right. Yep.
And so it wouldn't occur to me that they couldn't say, oh, we're going to put number 2A above 1D, because I just assumed they could do that in thinking through this if it made logical sense. But maybe we're not sending that message by this organization either.
Well, and I think it's important too to keep in mind the agencies that are in the process. We've got 32 agencies and well over 100 services, and the city isn't funding every single service, but we're funding the majority of them. And within the mental health sphere, the primary organization that is in the asset process that provides outpatient substance abuse and mental health services is YSS. Irely Ball withdrew from the process a number of years ago. CFR is not involved in Community and Family Resources is not involved in the asset process, and so when we look at this, our the number of agencies available providing these level of services is really limited to one. And then we've got the ARC of Story County and NAMI, who are our advocate organizations. One primarily serves individuals with mental health issues, the other one with brain injuries and intellectual disabilities. So two different population groups, but they do advocacy, they do support groups, they do education kinds of things. And the volunteers are astute to knowing that after they've been through the process, a couple of times, and knowing then that it's not like we have 12 agencies that are all providing outpatient mental health services and we have to figure out how we're going to get the funds to them. But it gets narrowed down based on the agencies that are involved. Having said that, we still look at the quality of services and the impact they're having in the community and the outcomes that they're reporting through scorecard.
Okay, so what is the council's preference this evening to Deb offered 3 different options in the memo from that was in the packet, maybe others, but it'd be helpful tonight, in light of what's talked about. And I think Brahman, you raised a point about how do we, keep this in the conversation. And another option would be is just to do some study, as Amber was saying, is review the scorecard or get into and drill into that and see if some of that information is there. I'd just like to help shepherd this along and get some direction for staff, especially since we got in a few weeks, Deb will be here, with the priorities. And so this is a timely, conversation.
Do we have a plan to have a midsummer meeting of the council to go over things?
We have,
like our own goals and
Yeah.
we had, actually, it was after last council meeting, Amber brought that up. Are we going to get that scheduled? I don't think we have it scheduled yet. Is that right, Steve? But
No, I'm trying to combine that with our training session, remember? But we'll see if we can lock in the date there.
could I make a motion
Sure,
on my
absolutely.
thing and see if enough people like it? So I would move that we move I'll say strike the phrase with an emphasis on low to moderate income from number 2 and add a general phrase encompassing all 3 priorities that says with emphases on social justice and low to moderate income.
is there a second?
Second.
So is there a definition on social justice?
The federal government uses some definitions for that.
The reason I asked because the volunteers will be looking at that and saying, what does that mean?
I'll get that question.
Pardon me?
I'll get that question from them.
The agencies will ask that. as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. So I mean, I think it's not questioning the motion. It's just more or less, let's make sure that we can have, or maybe if the motion passes, then you have to get a definition figured out for that.
Good question. I mean, I just use it because it's the best term I can think of that has the most people understanding some concept of what that means. We could wordsmith it too. I'm not opposed to that for sure. So I'm sure there's probably another way to say that. So I'm up for that too. I don't know if council wants some time to think on that, and maybe when when we just come back and talk about priorities, we have a better idea. Any thoughts?
You could consider saying that we have
Like that one.
an introductory statement that reflects low and moderate
our
income and
commitment
social
to-
justice to be
Okay.
defined at a future meeting. If you wanted to continue discussion. I mean, the concept that you moved it out of number 2 and put it into an overarching statement, I think is at the root of your motion.
Yes.
And Steve has found here a term, it looks at the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. That might be a way to do it, but we could get even more detail if there are things that we want to look at in terms of inequities
Yeah.
that exist within, or within our services, or within whether or not there are populations that are underserved within our community. So we could expand.
But those,
What about-
those
I don't know
are, what
that-
you just said right there, Nita, is a very broad range of issues.
It is.
And so I don't want to.
What if we said, what if,
I don't want to lose sight of what we're trying to accomplish
Yeah.
here. Asset has
Services.
served our community for decades, and it served it very well. And before we start making changes, I think we need to remind ourselves what we're doing, and if there's any kind of data that we're failing in this. I don't know of any situations that warrant the change that's being proposed. And so we have to be very careful. These volunteers spend a tremendous amount of time, and what they need from us is clarity in that mission. And I have no idea what this additional provision adds. And the fact that Anita there's several very viable aspects of what social justice means. We don't even know what it means. And yet we're going to ask our volunteers to apply that.
well, what
Help
if,
me out on that.
what if we use language instead that said, like, with an emphasis on low to moderate income and underserved, underrepresented populations? Something like that instead.
So
Again, we're just trying to see if there are gaps. Like you said,
Right.
you don't know of any, and I don't either. But maybe there are groups out there who are not being served as well as we could, right? I think that's the underlying point of what we're trying to do here. I think.
So usually you let council just talk about it. But I'd like to bring Deb in on this because this is it's a workshop.
Mhm.
With that description that was just made, a little more expanded in terms of underrepresented
Underserved, yeah.
population, what would be the opportunities and challenges for the volunteers as they're going through evaluating the funding requests for the coming year? Would that provide more clarity, or would that make it more difficult, or would they say, again, I have no comprehension of all the different groups that are funded and are the unintended consequences, or whatever. I don't know, but maybe not. Maybe it's all we're already doing that. So anyway, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think they would come back with the question, okay, is there a threshold? If a group is underrepresented, is it underrepresented by 50%, 10%? What's council looking for in terms of underrepresentation?
And if a group doesn't have any data on that, whether they serve it or don't serve it, then do they not
Receive funds.
receive funds?
Well, and so if I'm a volunteer and I am assigned to Mainstream Living, and I go to Mainstream Living and I'm talking to them about who they serve and all the demographics of their current list of members, how do I, as a volunteer slash agency, know that I'm not serving an underrepresented group? Or as a volunteer, how do I know how do I collect information from the agency to tell me that they are serving an underrepresented group? So, I mean, just in terms of the disability community, for example, there are cultural differences in how people with disabilities are cared for. So that affects the demographics of the people that are served by those agencies. And so a particular population might be underrepresented, but there could be a reason behind it too. So I just don't know how we collect that data, because it's going to be different for every single service and every single agency. And I don't know that you would know just looking at the demographics of a population that an agency serves that they're not serving a particular group that they should be serving. Does that
But
make
would
sense?
the agency be able to answer that? If one of the volunteers said, tell me more about the demographics and what are the challenges you're facing? Are there groups that you would like to serve better? And what are you planning to do? Like if there were some questions like that, could the agency answer those questions?
I think part of the issue is that there's such a broad range of agencies. So you have very, very large, multi-million-dollar agencies who have loads of staff and people who are just in charge of tracking outcomes for an agency. And then you have agencies that literally have a single staff person. And so I think it's unrealistic of us to put the same sort of tracking demands on both kinds of agencies, because some of them just don't have the capacity to even be able to do that.
Is there a way we can tie this into the kinds of data that is currently being collected by the Clear Impact Scorecard? For example, the number of people with mental and physical disabilities, the number of people in the various poverty guidelines categories, the number of people in various race and ethnicity groups.
So
That data's
it's
already
not for
being
the
provided,
volunteers
right?
To do. Although I don't see it, at least on NAMI's scorecard, there's not.
It's not
that
on the
type of-
scorecard. It'll
Right,
be on
right
the
now
budget.
it's in the
Oh,
budget.
it's
Yep.
in
Yeah.
Clear Impact. I mean,
Yep, in the budget
other
submittal.
source.
It's in the
Okay.
application.
It's in the
Yeah.
application. Okay, sorry.
So you got me. I agree. I don't know that this is the right place for what I moved on that one. So I'll withdraw my motion. I would like to move still though, that we move the qualifier from number 2 to be an overarching qualifier over all 3 categories.
Second,
I don't think it'll hurt anything. I think
Any
services-
discussion on that new motion?
So could you clarify? I apologize.
Oh, sure.
We're clear.
Yeah, so on number 2, where it says meet basic needs, comma, with an emphasis on low to moderate income, we would take that part where it says with an emphasis on low to moderate income and move it up to the top, just under the title, basically, so that it would be in effect for all 3 of the
All of them.
priorities,
Yeah.
rather than just number 2.
With an emphasis on low to moderate income.
Deb, how would that change the way in which the volunteers do their work if the low to moderate income criteria was distributed as Bronwyn has suggested?
I think there's already been this assumption that that's where the emphasis is.
Yeah.
For all of the services, again, based on how agencies are invoicing the city. So going back to the mental health example that I did, where if somebody's got private insurance, that's what's covering their therapy appointment or somebody has Medicaid, that's what's covering their, because we can't supplement Medicaid as a public entity. Where we can provide funding is if somebody has lost their Medicaid and they're waiting to get it back, or somebody has lost their insurance or is in between insurances. And so that's how those situations are handled. Most of the needs within number 2, the basic needs, are offset kinds of programs anyway. So the dollars that we provide for daycare go towards people who fall in the sliding fee scale, and we help fund their daycare that way. Under youth development and services and activities, it's primarily through scholarships for kids who are attending those programs, going to the Boys and Girls Club, Campfire, those kinds of programs and activities.
So is the emphasis on low to moderate income by shifting it to 1 and 3 as well, we're just in essence communicating what's already being done in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Brahman, so is the goal here to have a substantive change or to clarify what is already being done?
I would say to clarify what is already being done. Like Deb said, the assumption is mostly already there that that's what the funds are for. So I think, yeah, I just, when I looked at this, I was like, well, that's all of them. I mean, and it, mostly.
So I think your point earlier about the fact that council may understand this now, but next year we're going to have new people elected to council and there will be new volunteers, and who knows whether the people in the future will have that same understanding. So does council want it to apply to all of them or not? I think that's, to me, that's the issue here. If we want it to apply, we might as well clarify it by moving it as an umbrella.
So just to clarify too, if everyone has their priority list up, so it'd be where it's italicized, categories 1, 2, and 3 are in priority order, as are the lettered services in each category. And then would you just say
with an emphasis
on low to moderate income?
Exactly.
Yep. And that way it's the priority and describing it, and that way Deb knows how council wants it to be.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Is that,
part of
is that consistent with what your
Mhm.
motion is? And does everyone understand that? Does that make sense?
Yep, exactly.
Any further discussion?
I just had one more tiny little thing since we're talking about the priorities.
Okay.
It's just a wordsmithing thing. On 2D, it says quality childcare
We,
cost.
let's vote on the motion.
Oh, yes. Oh,
All right, everyone,
good idea.
those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Okay, Brahman.
Sorry. On 2D, it says quality child care offset program. I think I would scratch the word quality there, because you could stick the word quality in front of any one of those, right? Of course, we want it to be quality, right? We want quality housing cost offset programs too. It just seems like that word could be stricken.
So, good point. Do you have any input on that? Is there a reason that should or shouldn't be there in terms of,
It's a
is there
word.
a lack of quality of
The
childcare out
non-quality.
there?
It's a word I think that I've seen that's kind of hung on from year after year after year.
Okay.
So we in Asset are we want all of the child care that's being provided to be quality, and they're all licensed. So these are all
Yes.
facility based, daycare centers, and so they're licensed, and so there are standards that they have to follow.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, we have a motion.
I would move that we strike the word quality from 2D.
Second?
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried.
I have a question.
That's all I got. Thank you.
All right.
I do have a question. So moving the statement emphasis on low to moderate income, do you still want the words costs, like food cost offset? Do you still want that language in some of those priorities?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was redundant or,
Hmm.
but it
Looks okay.
clarifies for volunteers and agencies. Okay.
So while council's talking about this, and we've invested about almost an hour and a half on, is there anything else that you're aware of that volunteers had questions on last year that'd be helpful to bring to council now that we could clean up either a word or something that they were unclear on that would be helpful for them?
I don't have anything at this point, but my plan is to share these changes with them, and we'll meet them before the next round or draft document comes before you. And then they'll be at the meeting as well to be able to answer any questions you might have. So
I will just restate, council, you probably remember the volunteers were greatly appreciative
yes, yeah.
of the changes that were made, that you made, within about a year ago, and said it was very, very helpful in terms of what they were going through the process. So
All of the volunteers were
yeah,
pleased with that, not just the
so
city.
I think we're really on the right track here in terms of helping them accomplish goals and objectives.
Yep.
Any other motions or anything else regarding this topic tonight?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to move that we get a recommendation from staff on an appropriate time to introduce this regularly into our discussion. The discussion of, well, everything that we did tonight. How would I categorize that? That we review the social, can I use social justice? The social justice issues around the time that we are setting priorities. That was a mess. Let me try again. I would move that we get a recommendation from staff on an appropriate time for council to have a discussion similar to tonight's on an annual basis so that we understand our asset priorities in light of council goals.
Second.
So I guess my question, I love the idea of asking the question, are we getting this right? So broadly, they need us to get this right. I think we should have an annual time when we take a step back and say, how are we doing? But I wouldn't limit it to just social justice issues. I think broadly, we need to ask the question, how are we doing? And so that would be I don't know why we would limit it to just social justice.
I think my new version eliminated that, and it was just have a discussion like we're having tonight,
Well,
Which
which
covered a lot.
was, yeah. I don't-
Renee, you want to repeat the motion? So-
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was
Try
the
that again,
motion?
Renee.
Hey, Renee's saying, let me go back and look at the tape. Yeah, that, yeah.
Similar tonight is maybe,
But we had such a wide-ranging discussion, and I clearly recognize that just talking about social justice was not, the be-all and end-all. of
wouldn't you
this
just do it at your
discussion.
budget, at your goal setting session? That'd be a good time to bring it up.
We cram everything into that goal-setting
No,
session.
excuse me, not goal setting. I mean priority setting.
Work.
I mean
Yeah,
priority setting.
Priority setting?
The priority setting discussion. It would be the first thing you talk about. Make sure it's incorporated in
Maybe.
there. Instead of having
don't
two
know.
meetings on it.
Makes
I'm talking about,
sense.
I said goals, I mean priority setting for asset.
Yeah.
And
And that happens every year.
yeah,
We're
but
gonna
is
do-
that part of a larger city council meeting?
Yeah,
Well,
but
we-
you could make it a
Yes,
workshop.
it
We
is.
can make it a
Yep.
workshop.
So I just don't want us to be in the position where we've got a big agenda
Yeah, fair.
and we're trying to set our priorities and, we zip through them without having a
We
discussion.
could ask that we do that, both those discussions would be at a workshop session rather than regular scheduled.
It's
Yeah,
just-
and I'm wondering if we can add to that a review of the outcome data as well.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well, that's what Tim
I
was
think that would be
saying, that's
helpful.
What you're doing too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
really, if
Be a good workshop.
the timing,
Right.
if you say in June of 23, you come back and revisit the same conversation and then look at other items. It seems like usually in the summertime, our workshops, are a little lighter. And so it might be appropriate to do. And it's also timely from your standpoint. In July, you're coming back with the goals, and then we're not, like to your point, Gloria, you're not doing it during council meeting. And I'm not trying to
Sorry.
point attention to the time, but the point is we don't want to spend an hour and a half in council meeting talking through this. Workshop is an appropriate venue to do that. But to Tim's point, let's broaden it out. Here's something else we could talk about that are other things we could take the temperature on.
So how about if I withdraw that motion,
Okay.
Renee?
Oh, darn, you just wrote it down.
And I will move that we have a workshop on asset
I was-
priorities and data,
Yeah, there you go.
Outcome data.
outcome data
Okay.
in June
Is June okay? Is that too early? Or is that what you want? That would be the
June-
priorities.
2023.
That'd be
Yeah.
the priorities too.
Yeah, we can do it that early.
Like,
Establish the
like
priorities.
we're doing tonight,
Yep.
and then you're going to go back, take any changes, review
And
it,
then
and
come back
come
in
back with the
July.
final approval.
Mhm.
Second.
All right, good. You understand the motion? I want to ask Renee to read it back, but I will not ask you to. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
The other thing I would say is, I think Gloria should be commended for helping us think through some issues. And there are lots of ways in which we're going to gather data. Some of them are very quantitative. Some of them are extremely qualitative. And so maybe as a council, we should go and help with Food at First and just connect with people that are there on that night and hear their stories. Maybe we should take a tour of the Bridge Home and understand what are the facilities that we're funding and understanding where they're staying. I started mentoring again through YSS, and it's just been it's been a couple of years since I've done this. And again, it's anecdotal, but I'm being reminded of some of the challenges that people in our community are facing. I hope all the council are doing different things. We don't need to do the same thing, but all of us need to be out understanding to the degree possible the community that we serve. So I think you're to be commended on helping us, or reminding us of that very important mission.
Thank you. Anything else? Otherwise, we're moving on. Disposition and communications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Deb. Appreciate it. All right, we have one item, communications from an email from Kevin Foley, Executive Director of Des Moines International Airport, requesting opportunity to speak to council regarding soliciting some financial support for the airport terminal project.
So I've written to Mr. Foley and told him that the council has three options before you. This is a very robust request, very unusual. So obviously you have a chance tonight to either express your desire not to pursue this request, right? You could turn the request down. You could invite him to a future council meeting and then make a decision on his request then, or you could delay till budget time and make a decision. This is, they're looking for $2 million from the Story County and the surrounding cities in Story County. Ours would be about $900,000. About they would allow us to pay over 4 years, which would be about $250 million a year. So this will be a difficult decision for you. I understand, because you certainly want to participate in this, but there's a lot of other priorities you may have with the city. And
Steve, I
I'll
have
just leave it at
a
that.
question. So in your tenure with the city, have there been other examples where the city has funded infrastructure or similar types of projects? We asked, for example, the county to contribute to some of our projects here. This is the first time I've been on council where we've been asked to fund a project for someone else. I don't want to write it out of hand. It causes us to think a little bit differently about using taxpayer dollars,
Right.
and trying to understand the cost benefit analysis. So if we make this investment, what is it our residents are getting? So do you have any examples of this?
To the best of my, I sound like a Senate hearing. To the best of my recollection, I cannot remember a time when we financed project of this account. Now, the county's a little bit different. You remember, we're major taxpayers in the county, and
We're
that's why.
2/3 of the population.
Yes, it's a little different. So you're going to have to decide, it's always it's difficult when they draw this ring, who benefits. I mean, I'm sure there's people from Mason City, even though they have an airport, drives down there, right? All of us use that airport, but I go to Minneapolis, I go to Kansas City, I go to Omaha. We don't try to ask them to pay for, there's a lot of people from Des Moines who come up here. We realize we collect that through local sales tax. People shop at Ames, they eat it in our restaurants. So it's a difficult request. If we don't contribute, will we not have a new
They'll be like, you
terminal?
can't fly out of here.
Yeah, they're not going to ban us from that.
From Ames?
It's just difficult where you draw the line where we benefit. So is there a benefit to us? I'm not sure.
Was there a deadline on the ask?
I don't believe so. As soon as possible. They'd like to know so they know how much funding they have. They're not going to be able to fund this all in one time. They're going to have to do it over phases. It's almost $500 million. I mean, and it's just difficult. It's difficult for me to justify, although I like to participate in regional projects. It's I don't know. It'd be up to you. It's a big lift for us, given we have sustainability projects we're going to be working on, and we have a lot of other projects right now. It's just
So, I mean, obviously, this impacts economic development. It's an amenity that's important to the residents of Ames.
it is.
I'm not writing this off out of hand, but it's difficult for me to do a cost benefit analysis on this.
And if I could, I was on a legislative policy committee phone call this morning with the League of Cities, and there are rumors that the legislature is already talking about coming back with a hard cap again, on property taxes and some issues with local option sales tax and, guaranteeing they're going to, fund it back to us. I will share with council that I'm getting concerned that the legislature is getting to the point that they're just, and they talked about the fact that they want to start affecting and lowering property taxes for people in the communities across the state. I'm just concerned that there's so many moving parts here. But, $250,000 a year may be a big deal in the future. I mean, I love having an airport that I can go down to. It's an hour away or less than an hour away and fly out of. More power to it. But it's just like we were all elected to represent, and you do a very good job of representing the Ames citizens. It's just, if we didn't have this specter, but my guess is I'm going to spend a lot of time at the State House next year because it'll be a 2-year session. We have some new people coming in, but a chill went down my spine when someone said that there's a person who actually served on city council. He was in leadership in League of Cities, was talking about, I think it's time to put some caps on property taxes. And it's just like, what are you saying? I mean, the pressures that the city has to try and balance budgets. But anyway.
Yeah, I think you're going to see these are challenging times. As many people are delaying projects. And if we're going to proceed with some, they're probably going to be over budget. So we're going to be, I think, scrambling, I hate to say it, the next couple of years, given the economy. So you'll have to make that decision whether you'd rather raise property taxes to pay for this or do another. Project.
If
And
we
again, I
were
don't want
to-
to sound like I don't want to be supportive of regional.
Right.
I just think we have so many projects ourselves now.
So if we were going to take this up, my recommendation is we would do it in a budget time where we can see this in context with other priorities of the community.
Second.
There really wasn't a motion, but I can make it a motion.
Yes.
Consider that a
That was my
motion.
hint.
Discussion.
I
I
agree.
have to admit, I'm finding it difficult to even want to spend the time considering that, given how much we have heard about the increasing costs of construction on the projects that we currently have underway or are seeking to have underway.
Yep.
And I understand the arguments for economic development, but we have enough difficulty funding our own projects as is. And I don't know. I guess I'll surprise myself with my vote. Because that, I would either say we don't pursue it or we put it in at budget time.
Yep.
Because I don't think this is the appropriate time.
Mid-year, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you adopted a policy that no outside requests come in after December 31st. Wisely so, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So would it be appropriate for them to come November or early December to make a presentation for consideration? Is that,
I think bumping it to the next budget cycle isn't that what that is doing?
that would be funding it in 23, 24?
Well, it would be deciding on it at budget
But
time.
the outside budget requests
Yeah, it would.
come in February, don't they?
But they have to have us,
They're due
they're
in,
due before the end of the year.
they're due in October.
Oh, you
yeah.
mean the submission?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would just be submitted with those sort of.
Well, that'll throw that total awful amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
If you want that to compete against your other entities, I don't know. But I think it's right. I would never recommend you commit $1 million right now. You can't
No.
do that. You cannot do that. So the earliest you can consider it is during budget time, I think, if you want to consider it all.
So when would you recommend? I'm just trying to get a date specific so staff has some kind of idea, or some kind of a month specific you think
Hmm.
to fit into the flow of things.
Well, you don't make your final decision until February until you see the whole budget picture, and
Right.
this is just, we have to be an add-on somehow. You're gonna have to raise taxes for it.
But all he's asking for is the motion is just to have him come and make a presentation. It's not making a decision, right?
Oh, then you could do it in, let's see, December, I think, because you have your, what is it, the council guidelines sessions is later than that. So if you're just going to listen to the presentation, it should be November, December, whenever we have our goal setting session, or budget, our budget guideline session.
Because we, council agreed that December 31st is the cutoff for requests for funding, and this would be
A new one.
request for funding, and it'll be submitted before the end of the year. You
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
decide until,
Right.
if you want to do anything until February of next year,
Yeah.
right?
But do we
And I think
even, if we don't want to do it,
Yes, that's an option.
do we hold out the hope or keep their hopes alive by saying, well,
Think
okay, you
about
can
it.
come and talk to us in November? That doesn't seem right. So I think the question is,
Yeah.
do we want to do it at all,
Right.
or do you want to hold it till November?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
All right, the motions on the floor is that they would come sometime later this year,
End of the year.
end of the year. And it's been seconded. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion failed. All right. Is there a motion regarding response to this, Mr. Foley?
I would move that we reject the request.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried. All right. All right. Bryce, you have been so quiet and over there. I'll let you start tonight.
I don't have anything.
All right. No problem.
Nope, nothing for me. Thanks.
Nothing tonight. Nothing for me?
Just thanks to those that came out for Juneteenth. We thought we had a great first collaborative community-wide event. It's not the first one for Ames, but the first one at this level. So thanks, and hope to have folks who couldn't come out this year come out next year. We'll be working on it.
Thank you.
And Anita is holding back on us. She was actually one of the people who organized this. So kudos to Anita and your leadership team for putting this on. John, could you give us just a little bit about what you're doing Sunday morning?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
like,
But I'll get to that in my comments. Yeah.
You're going to do that in comments? Okay, nothing else tonight.
I want to thank council for having the discussion about the asset priorities and our role in those. I also want to commend the team that put together the Juneteenth. It was a great experience, really nice day. And I think from what I heard, there were lots of people coming in from the neighborhoods who didn't know there was an event going on, who walked by and heard the music and stopped in. And I think that's a really good sort of community event that will attract people. Bronwyn and I will be bringing back recommendations for the staff, our employee wage package for the next fiscal year at the next meeting. And we will send you information on that before the meeting.
Very good.
That's all I got.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the reminder, Tim. There's a triathlon that's being held at Ada Hayden, and I am not going to be participating in that. But I will be offering some welcome comments. But it is an amazing event. Maybe Mr. Garten is participating in it, but
I'm not participating.
oh, okay, all right. But anyway, boy, there's a lot of people that come, and they just love what goes on. And thanks to council for approving the swimming, in Ada Hayden, and it's just if you want to watch, you better get out there early or ride your bike or walk, because it is jam packed with traffic. And I offer a few comments like at 7:40, and I think it kicks off at 8:00. Is that right, Tim? Yeah.
Oh, it's early.
A lot of volunteers, a lot of work, but a great thing that goes on. And I will share with council too. I've interviewed 2 individuals for RPAC, and I'll be submitting to council for consideration 7 individuals in the council packet next week. And then it would start on July 1. And I've met with 2 so far. I have 2 tomorrow and 3 on Thursday. And we have some really top-notch individuals from a very broad cross-section of background representative. And I'll be highlighting that also in my comments to you. But I'm really excited, and it's taken a while, but we distilled it down into a small group, but get them going. And I know Chief Huff is excited to get that going too. So,
Yeah, good.
okay. All right, with that, I entertain a motion.
I actually do have something. I remember. I've been gathering comments from student government members about the memo. It's been weeks and weeks ago now, but next Tuesday we'll see the memo from Steve about the welcome back weekend. But I've been gathering some comments from student government members that I will be sending out to you guys in regards to that.
Thank you.
That'll be on Tuesday. Next Tuesday.
All right, entertain a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
Second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.